So, do you have a soul? Do you have a soul? In the last 200 or 300 years, many philosophers and thinkers would have just dismissed this question out of hand. They'd have said, no, we're just matter, we're just material stuff, and you can ignore the question of soul and leave that to religious people and people in the past, in the Middle Ages or whatever. But what's really interesting is the greater the advances in AI, the more profound the questions that are coming up about human intelligence and mind and consciousness and even the soul. Alan Turing famously claimed that we don't need to decide whether a machine is actually thinking or consciousness. We just need to know whether it acts like it's thinking. Can it simulate intelligence? Can it fool us by passing the famous Turing test? Can it fool us into thinking that it is thinking, into believing that it has a mind? There's a distinction here between what philosophers call functional consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. Functional consciousness means, can it do the things that thinking does? Can it deliberate, reflect, create, evaluate, remember, solve problems? If it can do these things, fine. But phenomenal consciousness means this thing, you and I, we have sensations, an inner experience, subjectivity. I'm self-conscious, I'm self-aware. I've got an enduring sense of who I am. I have an I. Functional, phenomenal. In the past, most AI specialists were not very interested in these distinctions. It was good enough just to know that your AI system works without bothering to think about, does it experience or not? But in recent years, many AI thinkers are beginning to ask much bigger questions about the human mind, to see if there is something missing from the current frameworks that are being used. We've got narrow AI, artificial intelligence that can do so many focused, narrow tasks really well. But why is it, many people are saying, why is it that artificial general intelligence is so hard to achieve? An AI that will be able to problem solve more broadly, that will be able to have some common sense, that will be able to understand the context, that won't need all this big data just to come up with some very simple, practical, commonsensical answers. When will AI become more like general human thinking rather than narrow, focused machine thinking? Why is AGI, artificial general intelligence, so hard? What is it about human beings that allows us to generalize, to abstract, to transfer learning from one area to another? This is the question of mind, of consciousness. There is so much more reflection today on how human intelligence, for example, is embodied. We learn through bodily experience in a physical environment. Human being is always relational. There's a social aspect to language and learning. Children develop through being loved, through shared experiences, and through giving shared attention to whatever is at hand. A child is noticing what its parents are noticing. In other words, AI people are thinking, AI itself, machine learning, is not just about what you program into a machine, but what this machine physically is, how it learns from its built environment, how it interacts with the things and the people around it, and how it interacts with the environment through the experience of the people around it. So it's broadened. The idea of AI learning is much more complex and interesting than it used to be. At the same time, there is a new interest in how human rationality is inseparable from free will and self-consciousness? Maybe. AI thinkers are looking into the richness of human philosophy and theology from the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, and they're seeing how human reason, AGI, general intelligence, not AGI, human reason, human general intelligence, in the Western philosophical tradition and in many other traditions, human reasoning is linked to free will, self-consciousness, abstraction, having a conscience, and what's called intentionality, that my inner subjective experience connects me with a world outside and with people outside, and that touches my experience and my thinking. And then AI is realizing that these qualities of human reasoning and self-consciousness and abstraction and intentionality, they've very often been associated in philosophy with what is non-material or spiritual in the human person. In the Western and the Eastern philosophical traditions and religious traditions, intelligence is more than just brain power. It's to do with something about being human that is non-material and spiritual, whatever that may be. Does this mean that the pursuit of AGI, artificial general intelligence, is inevitably doomed because maybe there is a non-material component to human reason that can never be replicated in computers or machines? Does this reflect similar questions about what makes human intelligence different from the intelligence that we see in non-rational animals? We know how intelligent, in one sense, animals are. Bonobo chimpanzees, dolphins, your pet dog or cat or budgerigar. Yes, but will computers and machines be able to rise to the level of intelligence that we find in these very intelligent animals? Will they rise to that level, which many philosophers would say is a material reality? But will these machines never be able to cross the threshold into human general intelligence because they don't have a spiritual and non-material aspect component that we human beings have that makes us different, perhaps, from other animals? Or can a machine be given a soul and achieve self-consciousness somehow? Loads of questions. What I'm highlighting is that AI research, to put it very simply, is thinking more and more deeply about body and soul. It used to think that we could do all of our research and all of our AI development on the model that the AI mind is like the human mind, which is like the human brain. In other words, there was an identification, complete identification, between the human brain and the human mind. All the mind is a brain working really well, an embodied brain, but it's just a brain. But now lots of people, very serious people, not necessarily philosophical, not necessarily spiritual or religious, or very many of the materialists are saying, hang on, this is so complex, and it's becoming clearer and clearer that the human mind, whatever's going on in our mind, our consciousness, our experience, is bigger and more complex and involves more than just the brain. And for shortcuts, for shorthand, let's call this body and soul. How does the brain and the mind link to the body and the soul in human beings, and what does that mean for artificial intelligence and for computers? In other words, there's been an exterior movement in AI research from brain to body, and now there is an interior movement from the brain to the bigger picture of the mind and to an even bigger picture of the soul. I'm delighted as a Christian philosopher that after centuries of human philosophy becoming more and more materialistic and narrow and less interested in questions of body and soul and freedom and consciousness, suddenly in the last 10 or 20 years, because of these developments in AI philosophy and philosophy more widely is becoming newly interested in questions of human uniqueness, embodiment, and the immateriality and the spirituality of the human mind or the human soul. This is a great step in itself because it makes philosophy and theology more interesting. It's going to lead to incredible new discoveries, I think, because the questions that AI scientists and philosophers are asking are broader and richer and truer. And, this is another bonus, it might allow Christian philosophers and theologians to contribute to the debate in really constructive ways because we've got such a rich tradition of reflecting on these things. Our intellectual tradition is so rich, and the religious traditions and philosophical traditions of other religions and philosophical movements, it shouldn't surprise us that the wisdom of the past and the wisdom of the tradition might come into play in AI research over the years ahead. Lots of exciting things to think about.